డిలే ఉంటుంది మామూలుగా ఇక్కడికి. Sir, live?
Shall I?
Yeah, I think 10 seconds is up, Lakshmi. We can start.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this discussion of the XAT paper. So all of you must be just back from taking the exam, the second most important management entrance exam after CAT. And also with this, we wrap up this long and tedious and exciting and challenging test-taking season. So let us sit back, relax in the knowledge that we have tried our best and take a look at the paper. Okay, are you ready? Let's start. First, an overview of the paper. As you know, it was conducted today, a 3-hour exam from 2 to 5. Yeah, it was conducted in a smooth manner. There were no technical issues reported. And this year, 1.42 lakh candidates registered for the exam. So that set a new record, probably partly due to the perceived difficulty level of CAT. Yeah, so there were 1.42 lakh candidates taking the exam. Now, there were no major surprises in terms of the pattern, the question types, number of questions, distribution, etc. Okay, exactly the same pattern as last year. So we had the usual 3 sections in the first block of 170 minutes, followed by GK for 10 minutes. Okay, so quantitative aptitude and data interpretation. There were 28 questions, absolutely no changes this time. Decision making, 21 questions, and VA and LR, verbal ability and logical reasoning, there were 26 questions. As you all know, we had 1 mark for the right answer and 0.25, minus 0.25 for every wrong answer. And the unique feature of XAT is that it has this clause where after the first 8 questions that you leave, you get a small penalty for every unattempted question. Okay, the penalty is 0.1. minus 0.1 basically. Okay, 0.1 is deducted for every unattempted question. That is a unique feature of XAT. So the same thing continued this year also. And then after this block of 170 minutes, we had GK. Now, GK scores are factored in by XLRI. Okay, those who clear the cutoffs for XLRI, when you get into the next stage of the selection process, then your GK score gets factored in. And also GK is a section with no negative marking. Another important feature of XAT is that they do not have time limits for sections, no sectional time limits. So you have the liberty and responsibility to manage your time and navigate back and forth in that first block. Okay, so everything remains the same. Now, let us start with the verbal ability section. Okay, we'll go section by section, cover all the sections in some detail. Verbal ability section, the VALR, there were 26 questions as we mentioned. Okay, so 15 reading comprehension questions, 5 passages with 3 questions each. Everything is the same as it was in the last 2 to 3 years. Okay, then this year, we had only 1 vocabulary-based question set. Okay, that was fill in the blanks So reading comprehension, I'll take up in a little detail shortly. It is, you can see the table there. But before that, let me run you through the other question types. Um, XAT has been a little magnanimous in terms of its vocabulary questions over the last 2 years, okay? Till I think 2024, this was a dreaded question type. There would be 3 or 4 vocabulary questions and the words would be really, really obscure and difficult. However, last year and this year, they have been quite sweet about this because this year they had one vocabulary set, a 4 blank fill in the blank set. Okay, till last year they had 3 blank fill in the blanks. This year they had a 4 blank fill in the blank set, more like a closed test. We have this pattern called closed test, more like that. The words were very, very easy, very commonly used words. The only thing is that you need to figure out the logic of the um, sentence. Okay, it was a lengthy sentence, so you needed to figure out the logic of the sentence. So very doable, very easy, fill in the vocabulary based FIP, fill in the blank. Then the delightful question type that they introduced last year, a cartoon based critical reasoning question. They kept up the promise and brought it this year also. However, it was not a very, very easy question. Okay, it was a cartoon of a wolf and sheep, where the wolf says something like, I'm going to eat you up. And the sheep say, okay, he tells it as it is. That was the cartoon. And the question was about the interpretation of this cartoon. The same thing as last year. Then para-jumble questions in XAT, they always give options for para-jumble. So the para-jumble questions were not too complicated. The sentences were not very, very lengthy. Okay. The difficulty level was moderate for para-jumble. Then there were 2 grammar sets, because in grammar, their presentation is they give 5 sentences and one question was pick the combination of sentence of all correct sentences. And the second one was pick the combination of all incorrect sentences. This was also easy to moderate, I would say, not very difficult. The errors were very straightforward, very, very straightforward. Anyone who had attended our classes or grammar discussions would have easily cracked it. So I would say easy to moderate. Moderate only because grammar per se is a little tricky for some students. That's it. Then we had 3 CR questions, right? 3 CR questions. That is, as the PPT says, 2 questions were on conclusions and one was on the statement that best contradicts an idea given in the passage above. So CR questions in critical reasoning questions in XAT are always based on very short passages. Okay, so that continued. These questions were also quite doable, of a moderate difficulty level. So the VA section overall was easy to moderate, but slightly leaning towards easy. Now comes the star of XAT, which is the poem-based reading comprehension. We have put it under VA, poem. The poem this time, as usual, was a little difficult to comprehend. It would have been a little difficult to comprehend for most students. It was a poem by the Indian English poet Arun Kolatkar. For the last many years, XAT has been mostly featuring poems by Indian English poets. Okay, so it was a poem which said, do not touch old newspapers because they have snakes hatching in their pages. The good thing was the questions and the options gave us some inkling of what the poem was about. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult to comprehend the poem per se. But looking at the options of the questions, it was sort of possible to interpret the poem correctly. However, as we keep telling our students, there is no need to attempt poems unless you are very, very sure, because interpreting poems can be tricky. So as usual, the poem set was a little difficult. Now comes RC. RC, I would say over the last 2 years, RC passages have been easier than what they were, let us say, 5 to 6 years ago in XAT. XAT was once upon a time famous for giving very, very abstract philosophy-based passages, but now that has they have relaxed that a bit. Okay, so look at the topics here. There was one passage on the discovery of nuclear fission and how from that we can understand that science is not really science per se. The field of science is not inherently moral or immoral. It doesn't have any moral principle. Science is about facts and objectivity. That is the concept here. It would have been a moderate read for most students. Okay. The next passage was how self-esteem affects our process of making comparisons with others. Okay, this was a lengthy passage, a sort of popular psychology kind of passage, but quite readable. The difficulty level, readability, was moderate. Now, there was another passage on a very contemporary topic, that is trolling. Trolling in social media. But it was not just about trolling, but how trolls target victims or people who are vulnerable in some way or the other, and how those who troll need to be anonymous, all these. It was a moderate to, yeah, it was I would call it M plus, okay, slightly, because there were certain concepts which couple of students were telling us that they found it difficult to comprehend. Though it was a very contemporary topic, but the good thing is it was a short read, so you could have spent some time in comprehending it. Okay, then the next passage here is on basically the weaknesses of liberal democracy, especially as a concept that emerged after the World War II. What are the inherent limitations and weaknesses of liberal democracy? This would have been again M plus moderate to difficult read for those who are familiar with topics such as liberal democracy. It is fine. In fact, this is a favorite topic in both CAT and XAT, right? Liberal democracy is a management exam favorite. So even in our material, I think we've given several passages on liberal democracy. Those who are familiar with this subject would have found it quite readable, but for others, it may have been slightly different. Also, it was a sort of dense passage because there were 4 limitations given and you would have had to keep track of the idea flow. So, yes. And then the next passage, it was a short passage, but again on the difficult side. Okay, this was about mutual understanding in diverse groups. Okay, how does one ensure mutual understanding while communicating with diverse groups? And there were some concepts related to metaphorical use of language, how you need to indulge in the use of metaphors when communicating with others who are different from you, etc. So the ideas per se may have been a little difficult to comprehend. Now, the reason I have not put the difficulty level of questions here is all passages had mixed questions of a mixed difficulty level. Okay, so there is no point in saying easy to moderate to difficult. That is the reason I have not put the difficulty level of questions here. But some of the passages, for instance, this discovery of nuclear fission, which was an easy to moderate read, also had some very straightforward questions. Okay, similarly, this passage on liberal democracy, once you got to understand the passage at least 2 out of 3 questions were pretty straightforward because the passage was demarcated into, let's say, 4 limitations of liberal democracy, and there were 2 questions on specific limitations. So once you understood the passage, they were doable. As usual, question selection would have been very, very crucial because many of the questions had very tricky options. As usual, in this passage, for instance, the last passage here, there was one question where 2 options were almost the same. Okay, so yes, we always keep telling you, please be very careful about question selection. Overall difficulty level was, I would say, moderate, but compared to what it was, let us say, 3 to 4 years ago, we should call it easy to moderate. Our students have also reported that they actually heaved a sigh of relief when they saw the section. Okay, so that is about the English section. Quickly, let us look at the unique section of XAT, which is decision making, and then we will move on to Quant. Okay, so this is the decision making section. I would say this year again, the overall difficulty level of the section has come a notch down. I would risk saying that mainly because 6 of the 7 cases were in one way or the other related to B schools. Okay, either B school based caselets or about fresh graduates, right? People who have just come out of a B school and who have just joined a company. There was just one set which was completely different. Unlike in the previous years, where at least 4 to 5 sets would be totally unimaginable kind of topics, right? So this year, the topics were, all students would have found the topics very, very familiar, and that itself made the difficulty level come a notch down. Okay, so that's why we have said it was easy to moderate and more straightforward. Definitely, the cases were more straightforward. There was no immense subjectivity. The moment we talk of real life corporate scenarios or B school scenarios, it becomes quite transparent and comprehensible, right? That ambiguity goes off. So, yes, it did look like a scoring section as long as you knew the basic rules of decision making, what XAT is looking for. That is transparency, not compromising on ethics, at the same time not compromising on your business, obviously, doing justice to all the stakeholders, right? The picking the choice that is least embarrassing to the management, but also the most ethical, and obviously avoiding extreme positions. So these are the basic principles of decision making. A quick look at the sets here. Again, I have not really put a difficulty level because almost every single set had a mix of easy and difficult questions. Okay. So the first one here was about, some B school group dynamics where there are these case study competitions, and a student who is a fresher wants to join a group where there are people with work ex, but then what happens, the politics, etc. 3 questions, there were 7 sets with 3 questions each. So that one, I think the questions were fairly doable. Probably there was one tricky question, and almost every set there was one tricky question and the others were doable. Okay, this is a pattern which we saw last year also. Then the next one is about this new recruit to a fintech firm who recruit from a top B school. He does very well there in this firm, but then he wants to move on to their cryptocurrency vertical, but his boss is not in favor of that. So that dynamics there. Okay. The next set was a situation where a family run FMCG, which has traditionally been operating with its family members, and some old school elderly senior people, suddenly they decide that they should keep up with the times and they should recruit some candidates from the Gen Z group. Okay, so they go to a top B school and recruit some Gen Zs. And then what happens? Specifically with one Gen Z candidate who feels that the seniors are being unfair to her or dismissive of her. Then again, another B school based set here. So you see, we have two B school based sets. The second one was about a fresh graduate, a fresher who joins a B school and realizes that she needs to join some committees in order to up her CV value, but then she's rejected by many of the committees because she's a fresher. So her dilemma there. The next set is the only one that has no corporate background or B school background. A very interesting case, but it had some tricky questions. See, typically what happens in decision making is when the case is not related to a business or B school, it is very, very subjective, isn't it? Yeah, in a situation where there are no business principles or management principles to use, the decision making becomes very subjective. So that is why this particular case was a little tough. It was about this person, this investment banker, Mr. Screwwala, who suddenly turned author and churned out a bestseller. After that, he gets offers left and right for, he gets book contract offers left and right. So what should he do? Now, in that situation, it is natural that you tend to put yourself in Screwwala's position, right? If I were him, what would I do? There starts the problem because there are no management principles to go by. So, yes, there were at least a couple of tricky questions in that set. Students who are struggling with time would have done best to leave this set. Okay, we have in our decision making classes given you sort of heads up on this. We have told you when the cases are extremely subjective, keep it for last at least. Okay. Then another one about test prep tutorial center where, yeah, a new HR and finance manager is recruited and she decides to sort out some issues which she thought were there in the salary structure. Okay, so it was an HR case basically. There were some issues with the salary structure. She thought she will even them out, but then she was met with a lot of resistance from the management. Then what should she do? So, so far you can see many of the cases were based on either some kind of HR crisis or dilemma or management ethics or B school dynamics. Nothing really, what to say, very far-fetched. Okay. And yes, this also is an HR-based case where there is recruitment going on in a firm and the talent acquisition head delegates it to his junior, the one below him, subordinate. But this person finds a candidate or wants to pick a candidate who does not meet the parameters stated by the talent acquisition head. Okay, so again, a dilemma. Should this candidate be selected? What should be done? So all these sets had at least one, if not two, doable questions. Okay, some said only this investment banker turned author set we felt had it was little tricky. The whole set was tricky. All the others had doable questions in there. Okay, so this is about decision making. As I said, the difficulty level or the overall doability has definitely gone down this year. So both English and decision making, I hope you exercised discretion in answering the questions. If you chose the questions smartly, I'm sure you would have done well. So that is it from me. Now I hand over the session to my colleague Rahul sir, who will take on from here and discuss the remaining sections. Over to you, Ra.
All right. Thanks, Lakshmi. Can you please confirm if you can see my screen?
Yes, absolutely.
You can see
Perfect.
my screen, right? Okay. So, Lakshmi, would you say some of the passages were slightly lengthier than last year or something like that? I've heard some students saying some of them
Uh,
feel lengthier or something.
I'm not really sure because there was only one really lengthy passage, right? One really lengthy passage which has happened in the last 2 years also.
Okay,
I
but
guess
the
what
poem was definitely difficult, I think, right?
poem was difficult,
The
but it
options
was,
weren't even close, I think.
yes, the poem was difficult. It was difficult last year also. Yeah.
But then the
Uh,
vocab and grammar were very easy questions.
Very easy, very, very easy.
So
And RC also, Rahul, yes, you are right in that sense that sometimes they do have 2 to 3 very short passages, but then those 2 to 3 passages would be really abstract and very difficult to read. This
mhm.
year, esoteric, I would say. So they were, we normally, we use the word esoteric for XAT,
I
but
mean,
there
this
were
year,
no,
most of the topics felt contemporary. See, people have seen
exactly,
the movie
exactly.
Oppenheimer, so they could actually relate to the entire passage on nuclear fission,
Yes,
you know? There
absolutely.
was
That's what.
Szilard and there was Bohr and there was actually Oppenheimer in the
Yeah, yeah.
passage itself. Anyone who watched the movie,
It
for them, it would be a walk in the
open.
park, I think,
Yeah,
just like that. You know?
absolutely. So that is why there was nothing out of the world kind of esoteric
Mhm.
topics. So that is why I say the difficulty level has come down. Last year also it was the same. Last year too, the difficulty level was a notch below the previous years. So the last 2 years, XAT, verbal and decision making have been doable, but decision making definitely because of the contemporary nature of the topics, it was a lot more doable. And as you know, Rahul, many of our students have got back and told us that they really heaved a sigh of relief for these 2 sections.
All right. So I'll just continue with the quant and DI section. Friends, I mean, for a lot of you who were stumped or, who were shocked by what CAT did on November 30th, a lot of people had their hopes pegged on XAT and some of the other exams. But today, we see a lot of people complaining that XAT let them down too, because XAT has also kind of, upped the ante, so to speak, in the quant and DI section compared to the last year or the last few years. We can definitely see that, the quant DI section was difficult. That is without a doubt, right? Hi, yeah, so you can see me. Great. So I was just saying, compared to the last year or the year before, Quant DI was definitely more difficult. Especially the pinch was felt in DI more so than in Quant, right? If you look at the distribution of topics, I mean, see, people have gotten used to a certain blueprint, literally every management exam, be it CAT, be it NMAT, be it XAT, be it SNAP, every exam usually has a lion's chunk or a lion's share of the questions coming from, arithmetic, literally the +2 topics, correct? So as it so happens, I mean, everyone expects about 40-45% of the questions coming from arithmetic alone, right? I mean, that's the case in CAT and in every other exam. But here today, if you see arithmetic questions, there was just one question from simple equations, as you can see here, and that was moderate. There was one question from profit and loss, from time and distance, though there were 3 questions, but there were hardly any questions that we could say were easy. There's just this one question from progressions where you have 3 lines, 3 circles that are being formed. The radii of the 3 circles are in arithmetic progression. The radius of the innermost circle is given and the outermost circle is given, and each 2 persons have to have a gap of 1 meter between them, and how many people need to be can be accommodated, kind of a question. That was perhaps the only question we could say is like easy to moderate, somewhere in between, but we really didn't have any easy questions. Now, those questions which could be done eventually, which could be cracked, were still taking a lot of time, right? There was a Venn diagram question, and this was the kind of a question where you would get the answer and you're still not sure, did I do it right? Is there some trap that I overlooked? Is it just that there is something? Because a lot of questions had minimum, maximum, at least, at most kind of a thing. This Venn diagram question had at least how many people were in the overlapping region. Okay. So literally, what would have disappointed a lot of people was the underrepresentation of, arithmetic, which is there were hardly any questions, no, zero questions from percentages, straight percentages, zero questions from simple interest and compound interest, zero questions from time and work, zero questions from averages, mixtures, allegations. Now, in that place, see, last year there were 12 questions in DI, but this year there are only 9, right? That would have meant, okay, 3 more questions in quant, more scoreable. But hey, the geometry questions were difficult, actually. At least 2 geometry questions, one geometry question about that pandal, that mela kind of a thing, for this in Bengal, you're constructing something for this season, Devi Puja, I think, right? For the puja. That question was so difficult. People came out wondering, did we understand the question right? Was my figure the one that was expected at all, right? So that question was so roundabout. The description was not very adequate or so, So there was a question on mensuration. I mean, in geometry, mensuration, trigonometry, of these 4 questions, I think only the trigonometry question was a very basic heights and distance question, and that was doable. People would have like really done that very quickly, right? Initially, the angle of elevation is 45 degrees. You move back a little bit and the angle of elevation becomes 30 degrees. How much further did you go back? That was an easy question. Now, even this profit and loss question wasn't a straight profit and loss question, not like a CP, SP, and everything else, right? We've had someone is buying this item and that item and that item, 9 kgs of this, 22 kgs of this, 50 kgs of this. And he's buying all these 3 things with the same amount. On the 4th day, he buys something at 35 rupees per kg. What is the minimum amount of profit? I mean, every question seems to have a flavor of special equations. I need to minimize this, I need to take the LCM and take it minimum, and then find out how many kgs are being purchased, and then find out the P&L. So this is not your straightforward P&L question, right? Numbers, a huge representation from numbers. In fact, every year what we see is XAT especially keeps arithmetic and algebra very close. Algebra is also something they prioritize a lot, right? So in numbers, there was one data sufficiency question. I mean, the data sufficiency question was also given as a normal MCQ question only with 5 options, right? So there were 3 MCQ questions and 1 data sufficiency question in numbers. Numbers had some pretty interesting questions. Not something you would say is very difficult. The data sufficiency question was moderate. The question about 125 is multiplied with either 10 or 15. That was a pretty creative question, you would say. But there was one question here from numbers, and that was pretty difficult. People struggle to even understand that question, I think. There was a xi is equal to bi by ai, a1, a2, so on, are all the prime numbers less than 25. That question was very difficult. I mean, people struggle to even understand, forget alone about answering it and hoping to get it right. Time and distance had 3 questions. Out of those, one was a traditional question, your Jamshedpur to Kolkata, one traveling from J to K, K to J kind of a question. And one was a little bit of geometry, Pythagoras theorem plus time and distance question. That was also doable. But there was one question about a swimming pool, your regular circular motion with swimming pool and then going against the flow and going with the flow. That I think most people would have found difficult or at least time consuming. Given 1 hour, a lot of people would be struggling for time. Given 1.5 hour, most people would come back and say all the questions are doable, or at least most of them. Barring 2, 3, or 3, 4 questions today. These are the quant questions we are talking about. We are not even talking about the DI yet. There was one question from functions, which was pretty difficult. There was the probability question also, which was pretty difficult, right? There were 3 groups of people who write an exam. One is lazy, one is confident, and so on. One of them is 10 times as likely to clear the exam as the other group, and so on. That was definitely pretty difficult. People struggle to even understand. Even the functions question was pretty difficult. You just had to start with x equal to 0, then put x equal to 1 and go ahead, iterate it. You'll eventually get it, but it would take time, right? Now, that was quant, definitely tougher than last year and definitely lengthier. And then we go to DI, the tougher part of the section, actually, right? There were only 3 sets of 3 questions each. That's 9 questions. Of these 3, like last year, there was a set based on Game of Thrones, and there were names of characters from Game of Thrones and everything. This year, there was one set based on Bridge Bhushan, the microfinancier, and there were some names from the popular hit series Panchayat in this set, okay? So there's this guy who lends money to people in his village based on based on how much land they hold. Okay, so per square meter, so much money is what I will lend you. I will charge 10% interest kind of a scenario. Now, all that is fine, but the really nice part in this set was it's a caselet based set. Okay, no data was given other than in a paragraph. All their lands were rectangular pieces of land, right? And no one's land was directly mentioned. Their lands were in a range. The smallest land parcel is 1,000 square meter. The biggest one is 10,000 square meter. And after a lot of clues and all that, you could nail down the exact area of only one guy there. All the others will be in terms of some variables, and you have to minimize it or maximize it. So this almost gives you a cat-like feel, right? A lot of people were, left wondering, did I come to cat or XAT? Because in XAT, in the past, we have not actually expected sets like this or seen sets like this in quite some time, right? Now, this is where the good news ends. Because if this set was tough, this set had a little bit of minimizing and maximizing. The next two sets were actually worse, especially the second set on trading. It was a trading floor, it was a trading company. They hire employees and then they give them some capital. And then with that, you're supposed to trade. And if your cumulative loss exceeds so much within 3 months, any consecutive 3-month period, you'll be fired. Similarly, if your cumulative loss exceeds so much in any 6-month period, you'll be fired, and so on, right? I mean, this was a true cat kind of a set. No doubt about it. A table was given, and there were variables X, Y, and Z, and people were wondering if it was even possible to solve for X, Y, Z. This was definitely a difficult to very difficult set, right? Best left, obviously, because remember, we are not in the business of scoring 100% of the marks in each section. We are in the business of optimizing our score, clearing the cutoff, and getting an interview call from the top B schools. Yes, so this was a set you should absolutely have left. At first glance, if it looked tempting enough, once you scroll down and you saw the table, 3 rows of data, 4 cells, 6 cells, or 10, 12 cells of data per each row with X, Y, and Z. And there were so many red flags all along. This was, I think, hands down the toughest set in the Quant DI section, DIYs. And then there was the third set based on Light Chemicals, a company, and their employees across different cities and different departments. This was a sunburst chart, if all of you remember, a few years ago, CAT 2017 or 18 or 18 or 19. CAT had actually given a sunburst chart too. So we made it a point to sunburst charts are very much a part of our CAT preparation material. Those who have prepared with us, those who have gone through our material would see at least 2 sets based on a sunburst chart, how to read it. Now, the challenge here was this is actually tougher than the set which appeared in the CAT exam. In the CAT, the sunburst chart was fairly easy to interpret. All the figures were given. You just had to immediately refer to the chart and answer the questions. However, in today's set, what happened was there were 6 unknowns, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. There were 6 unknowns, and the 3 questions had to be answered with partial information only. So that made the set extremely lengthy, painstakingly lengthy, and a lot of calculations had to be done repeatedly. You had to add these regions, you had to add the HR in this city, you had to add the IT in this city, you had to add the junior level across cities and all of that. So this was also a set that you could have best left, because your cutoff is what you're going for, and then you'd like to maximize your score. So you don't want to sink your time in difficult sets, right? So what's the takeaway? Tougher than last year, no doubt. And the flavor is actually close to CAT. Now, this is what everyone would have definitely related to, right? Quant as well as DI. I mean, where in the past we were getting only calculation based or, very peculiar representation kind of sets. In years where XAT gives peculiar DI or, very interesting, fresh kind of representation of data, something they take from a World Bank chart or something like that, or a scatter plot or something. In such years, usually the questions are straightforward. If someone can understand how to read the chart, they'll be able to answer the questions and get them right. That's usually how it is. Now, this year, we are moving away from that. I mean, sunburst is something you could still relate to that way. Okay, it's a new kind of presentation, something that MBA aspirants would not have seen in a long time. But if you look at Bridge Bush and the microfinancier or the trading floors, right? they really feel a lot like, reasoning based DI or quant based reasoning. These have the exact flavor as CAT LRDI nowadays has. So is that going to be the new trend? Are we going to see XAT also harass aspirants with very difficult, very tricky DILR sets from next year? Who knows? Let's wait and see. But this actually feels like a step in that direction, right? I mean, because two of these are caselets. There was no DI, no presentation, no table, no bar graph, no line graph, nothing. If questions were chosen correctly, you could still maximize your score. But if you were stuck on the wrong question, well, really, God save you. And then the GK section, all of you know the score doesn't actually matter at this point, right? These 20 questions do not have negative marking, and it wasn't difficult for a serious aspirant at all, right? With some preparation, if you're reading, following the news, if you're following the magazine, if you're following the happenings around, I mean, all these questions should be very easy to answer. There were questions on celebrities, sports persons, prizes and awards, match the musician with the instrument, current affairs. GST, which slab was done away with in the most recent September changes, recently launched satellites, which comet came very close to Earth in December, right? Semiconductor museum, in which city is that going to be started in India? Creator of some famous ads, the man who died recently. So that his name is the answer, Mr. Pandey. There were questions about startup. What do you call a startup which exhibits certain characteristics? Everyone knows only unicorn. Most people would not know the other names, right? So one such name had come up in the exam. Infra project, the China bridge and everything, it's part of which infra project? Nowadays, everyone talks about millennials and Gen Alpha and Gen Z and all that. So XAT decided to, make some fun of the situation. They gave different generations and asked you to arrange them in the order, which comes first and which comes last. There was a question on Satya Nadella's project Suncatcher by Microsoft. And there was one very interesting question based on the different parts of a Dravidian temple, a South Indian temple. Gopuram, this, that, and so on, right? So definitely not difficult for a serious aspirant. It was the fastest way to rack up some marks, 10 minutes. I mean, I've seen people finish all 20 questions in 4 to 5 minutes and then just sit idle, right? GK was not any of your worries at all. Now, quickly, friends, these were the cutoffs of last year, that 2025 cutoffs for XLRI Jamshedpur. I'm showing you the BM cutoffs and the HRM cutoffs. You can take a screenshot. This will stay in the video. You could always come back to the video and refer to this on YouTube, this part especially, because it would be pretty important, right? You can see the male cutoffs are different and the female cutoffs are different. The cutoffs are different for engineers and people from a tech background and for people from a non-engineering background, right? For example, for BM, the overall cutoff would be 96 percentile for an engineering male, while it is 91 percentile for an engineering female. For a non-engineering male and female, the overall cutoffs are still the same, but the sectional cutoffs are different for the males and females, right? So this slide, please take a screenshot, save this. A lot is going to depend on this. Now, the most important question, the $1,000,000 question that's on everyone's mind, what will happen to the cutoffs this year? Now, if you see this, what can be considered a good score? What you see on the screen right now, 90 percentile, 95 percentile, 99 percentile, these are not the scores of this year. These are the scores of last year. Last year in XAT 2025, what we do know is that a 90th percentile score is just 28 marks. A 95th percentile score is 30 marks. I mean, see that a 2-mark jump is causing a 5 percentile jump in the overall percentile. And a 99 percentile was 38 marks. From 95 to 99, you do see a more significant jump. Are they going to stay the same? More likely, more often than not, no. They're going to come down slightly. Is that slightly or a lot drastic? Maybe not very drastic. Why? Because see, we've seen VARC and we've seen people feeling DM is like the last few years, and DM could be considered easier than some of the previous years. It wasn't very layered or it wasn't very twisted. However, Quant DI could be playing the spoil sport, right? Because of Quant and DI section, the percentiles we are hoping will definitely come down a couple of points or something like that, right? So tomorrow and day after tomorrow also in the evenings, we'll be conducting the chat sessions for all the XAT test takers who gave the test and then want to come discuss their scores and everything. Last year, the scores were announced by 15th or 17th of January. Already the scorecards were out. So even this time, we are expecting within the week or 10 days, the response sheet should be out. And then the final key would be prepared and the final scores would be out, right? So now, whether you gave the exam well or not, assume that you're going to get a call. I think this is more important than wondering whether you did well today or not. Assume you're going to get a call and start preparing in earnest for an interview. Why? Because you start your preparation 15 days later or 20 days later after you get a call, and by then you would have lost 15, 20 precious days, which you could otherwise be spending on learning, about the budget, current affairs, what is happening in Venezuela, what's happening in the Indian stock market, what's happening in the country's economy, what is the nominal GDP growth rate, and what's the actual GDP growth rate, and things like that. You have a lot of studying to do. You have a lot of answers to prepare for, right? Why MBA? Why this college? Why this specialization? What if not MBA and all of that? See, now these are precious days that you don't want to throw away. This is my advice before closing the session. Assume that you're going to get a call and start working towards it, right? In the next 20, 25 days, if you so don't get a call, it's all right. Then we'll see what next. A retake or another B school or continue working for another year. We'll think about that later. All right, guys. So that's more or less from our side. Uh, Anyone has any queries, anything quickly? I'd like to answer a few queries before closing the session. Hi, Tanmay. Yes, you are absolutely right. Quants was difficult. No arithmetic. You wouldn't say that, but it wasn't as heavy as it is in the other exams. For example, in MAT, NMAT, or in CAT, arithmetic is a lot more